computer. Okay, so it looks like we're set and ready to go. Okay. Now, the thing is, we've been doing a lot with ancient history, right? In fact, that's, we kind of had an interesting start to the class. We did a little ancient, a little classical, a little medieval, and then we did some modern to try to kind of bring a history into focus so we could see that whatever happened in the past really does impact us today, right? All history is lived in the present. Kind of an interesting concept, but it's going to accelerate today. Now, in my poli-sci class, we had a bit of a shock because I get in there and realize that they had not had ancient history at all. They really couldn't tell me. I mean, I had 2 or 3 in each class that could, but I had so many students that could not tell me the basics about the ancient world, Hammurabi's code, how civilization, they couldn't give me a definition of civilization. So I had to stop. This is why they're behind. I had to stop literally for 2 days and give them a brief introduction to the things we've been talking about with Egypt and with ancient India and with ancient Mesopotamia, right? Because we're at a particular point in the poli-sci class, political science, where we're looking at the first people that start to really question what government should be. And that was, of course, the Greeks in the age we're going to be talking about today. And you can't really understand any of that unless you understand how life was before these great philosophers in Greece started to analyze governments and so on. But you don't need to know about that yet, because we're going to spend a lot of time on that when you get up on campus in a couple of years. But it's tied to this topic. This is the broad topic that I needed them to understand. We're just focusing on the political aspects of it. But here, we're focusing on something much bigger. It's called the Axial Age. Now, one of the things that you guys know, and hopefully understand now, is that the ancient world was not like the present, right? The gods that the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians and the early people in India, in the Rig Veda and whatever, the gods they worshipped weren't at all like what you would call the gods of modern religion. I'm sorry, they just weren't. Okay. If anything, they had their flaws and they had their weaknesses and they had their interesting character attributes. But yeah, and the laws themselves were a little bit like, okay, in the Jewish system of laws, you got the Torah, which is the first 5 books, and there's some pretty strict stuff in there, right? And then you look at Mesopotamia, where you had Hammurabi's code, and it's an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, pretty strict legal system, right? But it's dictated, either by a theocracy, or in both cases theocracy, but also by the rulers and leaders. And in Egypt, it was pretty much the same way. When Pharaoh said this was a good thing to do, you did it. You had Ma'at, and you had to follow a certain code of conduct that basically structured society. Oh, not unlike the caste society of India. Although what we see in India with the caste societies, it became more and more strict and more exclusive as time went on. I don't think that any of you, certainly I wouldn't, be comfortable living in any of those ancient societies. They lacked something. And the thing, I'm trying to sum it up into one word, and I think this word works, is that there was kind of a lack of compassion, right? There was strictness, there was order, there was stability, but you can't really look at any of those ancient rulers and the way their gods treated everybody as being tremendously compassionate. Something's got to change. And there's one historian that came up with a term for it. It's called the Axial Age, the age of change, where everything changes on an axle, right? At this point, everything changes. Something hit the world right around 500 BCE that is going to dramatically change the way people feel, the way they think, and the way they treat each other. And the world becomes more compassionate. Unless eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of thing. Well, okay, this process would continue through to Jesus and Christianity. and Muhammad and Islam. All of these new religions coming along, which we would actually today call religions, were kind of born in this era and kind of started to form in this era and would extend through that 1,000-year period. And so this is a very important time for us today, because it's really where the modern ethics and values of all civilizations around the world emerged from, away from that ancient thinking. Okay, so when it gets to, let's go through 6 different areas where it all kind of happened at the same time, basically. Now, there's not a lot of evidence that they influenced each other. Now, there's some evidence that maybe Greece was influenced by India, because when Alexander the Great conquered India, he picked up a lot of ideas. There was one guy that came back to Greece, became a philosopher that may have been influenced by Buddhism. But for the most part, they happened in those regions, and they have their own distinct kind of character and personality, but they're major changes. Now, what I would do, if I would get a picture of this. So for those of you playing games, right over here, get your camera out, take a picture of that, because I think you're going to need to know this. All right. Now, also too, why don't you come and sit here? I think that would be a better seat for you today. All right, so here we have, in Greece, we have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These Greek philosophers, we're going to talk a lot about them in political science. So we're just going to give you a few little basics on them, and we're not going to go into detail because we're going to do that there. So that saves me a few days here in ancient history, because I know we're going to have to come to them, because Plato is the first guy that ever started writing seriously about government, and Aristotle too. So that's where political science starts, actually. But as far as the rest of these go, we're going to talk about Mahavira, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, the Upanishads in India. We'll do that first. And then we're going to talk in terms of basically a little bit later in history about the Persian influence and the rise of a religious revolutionary named Zoroaster or Zarathustra, and how that would change Persian religion. And Israel changes. We're talking about Judaism and the 12 tribes. They go through a real change around this time period with prophets like Jeremiah, the second book of Isaiah, and Ezekiel, where they're talking more about compassion and less about strictness of following strict laws. And in China, you get the rise of Confucius and Lao Tzu. So we're going to kind of pick on the bottom part of this chart from India on down to China, and kind of piece this axial period together. All right, now, another one you want to take a picture of. There are 6 considerations that create this axial age. So according to some historians, right? Again, this is just a historian's perspective. All of these started in the original river civilizations. They started within the context of those ancient river civilizations. Why? Because these were the most advanced areas in civilization. These were where the big cities were, where the ideas were being exchanged. If you're living way out in the country, growing rice in China or growing wheat in Mesopotamia, or you were just working the fields, you probably wouldn't travel more than 15 to 20 miles from your home. You're not going to get exposed to all these ideas. But if you're in a city, people are sharing new ideas all the time. People from different cultures are showing up with trade goods and things all the time. And so it's going to take place in those river cultures where there are cities. Also, there's going to be some crisis, either a personal crisis or a crisis in the society that's going to change their ethics. It's going to give a different brand of ethics to a society that is troubled, a society that's lost its way maybe and needs to find a new path. The original ideas that were expressed by the people who kind of started these axial revolutions in the 6 places you saw on the previous slide, they would cause an ethical transformation that would be enhanced and would evolve over time. And every time they grew and extended, they would get kind of a new extra life, a new refinement. The ideas also, number 4, would spread beyond the ancient boundaries. In other words, they wouldn't stay in Persia. They wouldn't stay in India. They wouldn't stay in the East. They would extend out beyond the natural borders to other cultures, to other people. They also lasted. One of the things about all of these is these new movements of ethics, you could actually say, gave birth to what we would call a modern religion, as opposed to an ancient worshiping of deities. I think that's different. I think it's different to worship the gods of ancient Egypt than it is for one of the modern religions. That they're different, right? Well, they lasted. All these ancient things didn't last, did they? We don't worship Enlil today. We're not too concerned about Horus. Zeus is not a real topic of common conversation. So these would last. And the next one is, they all would try to answer in their own way universal questions, such as, let me give you some examples. What does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be a person? How do we relate to our world and the universe around us? And how should we relate to one another? Instead of like being in a caste where this is your caste, you do this caste and whatever, and that's your lot in life, and that's just the way you should be. How should we treat the untouchables? Should we touch them? Is that right not to? So they're asking some fundamental questions. They're challenging ideas. And the first place we're going to start to explore the Axial Revolution will be in India, right? Now, what is introduced after, you had the original kind of writings, the original scriptures, a little bit like the first 5 books of the Torah, and then in the Bible, for example, as opposed to scriptures that come later, like the Psalms and that kind of thing. The Upanishads are that here. Remember we talked about the Upanishads? The Upanishads were written to kind of make a more of a modern axial kind of sense of what they'd been taught in these earlier documents. The concept of action or deed in Indian religion starts to become paramount. How many have ever heard of the term karma? Raise your hand if you've heard karma, right? You know what karma is. Karma is that which causes the cycle of cause and effect. Now, this idea that you do something and it starts a cycle of cause and effect is described in Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism. And so this idea of karma is kind of within a lot of different religions that come out of India. It's kind of important. All right, what is karma? It's the sum of all that an individual has done, is currently doing, and will ever do. It results in, I don't know, for lack of a better word, fruits, or the actions are called karma phala, if I can say that right. So yeah, you do something and it has a reaction. There's a causality to it. A specific action leads to a specific result. A positive act will lead to a positive nature, to experiences of joy and happiness if you do good, positive things. You see how things are changing here? It's not whether you follow this law, and if you don't, they're gonna, if you steal something, they cut your arm off. It's like, no, come on, let's think of better ways to treat people, right? Why did this person steal? Were they hungry? Did they need help? If you act in a positive nature, you'll experience happiness and joy. On the other hand, a negative act will unavoidably lead to a painful result and will certainly cause some level of suffering. Whoa. In religions that incorporate these ideas, there's also this idea of reincarnation. How many of you have heard of reincarnation? Yeah, well, you're born into one life and then another, right? Karma extends through all of those lives, not just the one you're in today. I love this little tapestry here, where you start out with this life, it extends to this life, to this one, to this one, to this one, to this one, to this one. Finally, this is where you reach enlightenment, where you really truly understand the world. and you can break the cycle of reincarnation of lives. Karma extends to one's present life and all past and future lives as well. So in other words, what you do today influences you tomorrow, or in the next life, or in the life after that. You know, I often ask the question to the students, I said, why would somebody, like, remember that little video we saw of the person that's responsible to take in the dead bodies of people who have passed away and to cremate them on behalf of their families? And they have a religious ceremony that they use. There's certain chants they use, and they're using a fire that is 3,000 years old. This is a very important moment for people's families in the life of that individual. Why would you do a job like that, though, day after day after day? What's in it for you? Have you thought about that? Why would somebody, a Shudra, for example, continue to be a manual laborer and do the same job day after day after day after day after day? What is the, yeah, go ahead. Say that again.
Either money or religion.
Yeah, it might be you just need to eat, right? Or get ordered, or there's a philosophical reason why that's a beneficial thing. That person who is burying the bodies, is he an untouchable? The other people won't touch him, right? And yet he's essential to all of their religious practice. He's an essential worker. Don't you find that a bit ironic? So I love your answer. I think it was a good one. All right, so let's keep going. The effects of all deeds, past, present, and future experiences make one responsible for their own life. Whereas if you go back to some of these ancient religions, right? We're talking about ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, whatever. The gods determined what happened. The pharaohs determined what happened. You were just subject to whatever they said, and whatever outcomes happened that way. Yes, there was a ma'at where you had to basically live a good life. You had to answer those 42 questions and things like that. So there were definitely things that you should do. But by the same token, a lot depended on the gods and other people. Whereas here, they're saying, guess what? It really depends on you. You are responsible for your own joy and life and the pain and joy it brings to others. If you give pain to someone else, then that is negative karma on you. So this makes people want to help others. And what we're seeing is the birth of what we call ethics. Reincarnation is a tough thing for, you live in a Western society, probably have been taught Western religious ideas and things like that. I mean, that's a pretty good assumption, right? We live in the United States. So maybe this is new for you. Maybe though, if you come from an Eastern culture, maybe you can get your head around this a little easier than the rest of us, which is kind of a cool thing. But reincarnation is a little hard of a difficult concept to get. Something to be made flesh again. Basically, there's some essential part of living that survives, of the living person that survives death to be reborn in a new body. This essential part is often referred to as a spirit or a soul or a higher or true self or a divine spark or the I or the ego, whatever. There's lots of different ways it's explained in different religions and cultures. But there is today's body, but there's also something else special that moves on. And whatever you learned in the previous life is going to affect you today and affect you later. So even decisions you made back here will stay with you through these other lives, although you might not even remember it. Basically, a new personality is developed during each life in the physical world, but some part of the being before remains. There's a constancy too, through these successive lives. So reincarnation and karma are kind of intertwined with each other. Karma affects how you will come back in the next life. Life affects life. Now, how many of you have ever heard of the butterfly effect? Okay. It's a great thing, right? What I kind of want to do right here as we talk about this, I'm just going to pause this. Okay, so we just had a little discussion on the butterfly effect, which was pretty cool, which basically says, some other things can affect your life, even directly or indirectly. The belief that what you do and say affects everyone around you, everything around you. An example of how seemingly small, insignificant actions can have monumental effects on the world around us. Right. Karma isn't so much about individuals, but it has to do with all things or universal things that lead to you. So it's a much bigger concept than just do good things, you get good karma. I mean, that's how we simplify it in the West, right? There's more going on than that. And one of the things that comes through this whole karma is compassion is the only true way. That it's through compassion that we make progress as people and as a society. This is very different than the kind of thinking you would get in the ancient world. If my actions cause pain, then those actions in return come full circle and affect my own happiness somewhere, some way, somehow. So that was a great discussion. And so we just kind of summed it up for those people at home. Let me give you one of the examples, okay? This is an actual one that comes from India writing. Okay, a man sees an old shoe in the road. Could be that. Yeah, it could be that. Or what else? What are some of the possibilities? So you pick up the shoes, now you have a new pair of shoes. But what if they're an old pair? It's an old pair of shoes. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
You could take your eyes off the road to get a better look at the shoes and then get in a crash.
Or vice versa, avoid a crash, right? I love those. Those are good answers. Yeah, go ahead. I love that one. That one's good. And so there, even with an old pair of shoes in the middle of the road, it could cause all sorts of chain reactions, right? Love that. Well, let's go through this particular parable. Okay, so here we go. Ready? Okay, a man sees an old shoe in the road. It reminds him that he needs a new pair of shoes himself, and subsequently decides to drive to the shoe store. While there, he meets a woman who he will eventually marry and has a family. Did the pair of shoes change his life? To the man that threw the old shoe out, that was merely a useless item that cluttered up space in his closet. But to the man that met his wife at the shoe store that day, it was one of the many occurrences in his life that led to a marriage, children, grandchildren, and so on. This is an example then of true karma. People discover through karma their interdependence. That this man who saw the shoe was interdependent with the person who threw the shoe out. And they're linked forever. Karma, interdependence, not independence. The Western culture, we teach this idea of you got to be independent and everybody has to do it themselves, right? In Eastern cultures, it's different. Let me use another example, and I'm going to, pause the recording again because this is just more for fun. Because this class, I like this class to discuss. But let's just pause. So we just had kind of a fun discussion there on karma. But let's go ahead now and go to the next topic, which is Jainism. Along in the Axial Revolution, there will be literally revolutionary religious leaders, right? A whole group of them. You already know some. Name a revolutionary leader in religious or ethical thought that has come along through history. Yes. Good example from more modern times. Thank you for that one. That's one I hadn't actually been thinking of. Give me another. Yeah. Definitely, right? Who else? Yeah.
Jesus.
For sure. There's so many. You got another one? You could, yeah. There's a lot of them. The thing is, all of these start to happen during the Axial Revolution, where they dramatically challenge the teachings of, say, ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient India, ancient China. And one of these revolutionary guys that you probably have never heard of is Jainism, the founder of Jainism named Mahavira. Now, this guy, let's talk about him. Basically, there are two heresies in Hinduism. These are branded as heresies. Now, what is a heretic? What's heresy? Tell me what a heresy is. Okay, we got it, we're recording. Okay, otherwise I'd take it, but we're recording. Yes. Yeah, that's 100% right definition. It's anything that's different from what is actually being taught by the majority today. So Hinduism had a structure. It was there for thousands of years, and somebody's going to challenge that. Essentially, think about it this way. Anybody that disagrees with the norm can be branded a heretic. Somebody that thinks differently. Jainism and Buddhism are outgrowths of the two heresies we're going to talk about from Hinduism. They came up with literally an alternative means of salvation. They went back and denied the Vedic literature, the Rig Veda, for example, the author of Veda, all those Vedas we showed you about, the ancient scripture were the stories of the gods and their interactions, whatever. And they said, no, we're not going to go with that. And in like manner, some of the, other religious revolutionaries will say, yeah, I know what they taught in the past, but we need to change it. And so here we have Jainism. Jains are conquerors or saints. It depends on how you translate it. Okay, so that's kind of what it means. And the leader of this was named Mahavira. Now look at the dates, 599 to 527 BCE. It could have been no much later. We're not exactly sure on the dates for Mahavira, but nevertheless, the story is interesting and it's kind of the same as we're going to hear for Buddhism. Mahavira was born in the Kshatriya caste, which basically means he's the son of a minor ruler, right? He's the second of two sons. Now, as he's growing up, he's not happy. His life is luxurious. He has all that anybody could ever want, lives in a beautiful palace, all this kind of stuff. And he runs into a group of wandering ascetics. Now, ascetic is somebody who's denying themselves all of the normal good things in life. For example, they're going to probably sleep on the ground. They're not going to probably wear shoes. They're going to deny themselves food. They're going to fast. And they're trying to reach some sort of spiritual enlightenment. And he looks at these and he's kind of inspired by that, but he doesn't dare join them. And the reason is because he has this attachment to his family, as anybody in India does. Now, let me ask you a question, right? How many come from a family that if you don't get a good grade, they're going to be disappointed? Raise your hands. Look, if you're in India, in Indian society, if you're in Chinese society, if you're in Asian society, Eastern societies, you respect your parents and you don't want to embarrass them. And getting a low grade could be an embarrassment to them and to your family. And he's not going to leave his family unattended, but his parents eventually pass away. And his brother decides he wants to take over the family businesses and things and run them. So suddenly he is free from the obligations of family. Now that's kind of important, right? You have obligations. You have to honor those obligations. And he bid farewell to his brother and the rest of his family, and he became an ascetic. Now here's the deal. He becomes what we call a super ascetic. He denies himself more than anybody else. And eventually he found release from the endless cycles of lives, birth, death, and rebirth, as you see in Reincarnation. Asceticism is denied the pleasures of the body, fasting, sleeping on the ground, seeking the cold in winter, heat in summer. And with these ascetics, life becomes sacred, all forms of life. And for him, ahimsa was a practice that he then took on. This is strict vegetarianism. You can't do, for example, adorn yourself in leather because that means some animal has to die for that. Jains go so far as to sweep the road in front of them so as not to accidentally step on an ant or an insect. Even going so far as straining the water they drink first so they don't accidentally drink something and cause its demise. Now, you ever wondered why they treat life so sacredly in India? It's because of this movement. You know, the cattle just wander anywhere they want, right? Cattle are respected, part of the cycle of life thing, but this becomes kind of a new level. This is not something we do in the West, right? We see an ant, we're probably going to step on it. See a spider? Yeah.
See a spider, burn your house down.
Right. This is a different kind of way of looking at things. Now, also what's different is that it's dualistic. And some of these religions are dualistic. There's a soul, hiva, and matter, ahiva. The soul is encased in matter, but it can't be free because it's bound to the cycle of lives. So what you have to do is try to break out of that. And asceticism, I guess, would help with that. So personal actions for him are what matters most. What the gods do are of little consequence. Now we're talking about the ancient gods, right? The ancient gods of Egypt and Mesopotamia and so on. Those deities, right? Millions of them that are in India. The gods are also beings that live on a different plane. They're working on their own salvation. They got their own problems to deal with. You need to worry about yourself. They can't help you. So for them, prayer is ineffective. It's only actions that matter. Now that's a pretty different new way of thinking. He is, Mahavira, a religious revolutionary. Jains are required to do the following. And let's hope we have time for this. They always have to speak the truth. They have to be honest, for example, in business. They have to renounce attachments, for example. They're not going to stay very long in one place. By the way, an attachment right now, they would say your phone, your smartphone, you get too attached to it. I know I'm too attached to my phone. I can't go anywhere without it. You'd have to be able to give that up. That's somehow interfering with your life, like the butterfly, you just kind of want to leave it there maybe. And so there's certain occupations too that they can't do. For example, they can't be farmers because they might accidentally plow up a field and harm a worm or an insect. They can't be butchers. They can't be leather workers. So none of that. So what they entered in was usually business. And because they were so honest, they were sought by other people to help them run their businesses. You would want a Jain to be your accountant, for example. Now you can always have to speak the truth, and that's important too. But even that has an interesting component. Let's go through that in a second. The thing with Jainism, and I'm going to say this now in case we run out of time, it just became too demanding to become very popular. There's still a few million Jains in India, maybe practicing, it's in the hundreds of thousands. It's still there, but this is pretty strict. Now, here's the thing though. Truth itself, there have to be truthful always, but it's also relative. Have you ever heard of the parable of the 5 blind men and the elephant? Raise your hand if you've heard of that one, okay? So 5 blind men are asked, describe an elephant. So they walk up, they all come up to the elephant, and one touches the side and says, well, an elephant's kind of like a big wall. And then the other one grabs the foot and said, no, it's like a big tree trunk. No, it's like a garden hose. You got the tail. And somebody else grabs the trunk. No, it's like a huge, massive fire hose. It's not a garden hose, it's a fire hose. Oh, and somebody touches the trunk. And that has a very different feel, describes that. And somebody grabs the ear. No, it's like a big sheet of paper. Who's right? All of them are right, and yet none of them are right. Get your head around that one. They're all correct, but they're all incorrect as well. So being honest, always speaking the truth, is kind of a difficult thing to do. So you have to really be careful. So being a Jain is a very difficult, demanding kind of thing. And that's kind of where we'll stop for today. And if we want to discuss something else, we can. But let's go ahead and stop the share here and end this.